and just ask you how you see business process management enabling or relating to operational excellence. And Brian, I'll start with you and let Theresa kind of weigh in as well.
Sure. So it's a really critical element. I know we were talking about a little bit at the end of the last session. I was watching with Amanda and Christy about the importance of your business processes, really what's driving you as an organization, and that whatever efforts we have on strategy and other things about kind of the big picture of the business, the way it actually gets executed and turns into how you're operating as a business ties into what your business processes are, what your people are doing on a day-to-day basis on the ground, and not just what you think your business processes are, but what's actually happening out there. So it's a really critical focus that you have a good understanding of what your processes are, what's happening in real life, with whether on the shop floor or at the people's desks as they're getting work done, and having a clear picture of the reality of your business processes, because that's going to translate into what your results are for your customers, what your quality is you're able to achieve, everything along those lines.
Excellent. And anything to add to that, Theresa, especially from the human component side? I think that that's something that you really bring to the table as we have our holistic type of conversation today.
Sure. So in my opinion, operational excellence really has that broader, holistic look at the business ecosystem, which I kind of talked about yesterday, touched upon that. And then the BPM helps to focus when those opportunities are identified, right? So when you're talking about, in my opinion, business process management, that is a tool set. And I know there are a lot of similar methodologies out there that are comparable to BPM. So like you have your Lean Six Sigma, Lean Manufacturing, Shane and Red X theories, PDCA, et cetera, but they still have a core process, core steps in the process, right? So designing, you're modeling, you're executing, you're monitoring, and then you're going back and optimize. So that's how I see it fitting together. Like the operational excellence is that umbrella type thing, and then the BPM is underneath it. The other things that are underneath it, as Brian mentioned, are the change management, the leadership component, process, culture, environment, et cetera. So that's kind of, in my opinion, how they fit together and how they complement each other. One really helps to identify where those opportunities exist, and the other help to drive and optimize those processes.
Absolutely. I think that, just the marriage between the two is always important to consider. And I know Sam said over here, some of my clients say our processes are different. And then they say, surely everyone does it our way. So definitely a good piece of feedback there. And then I'll address one question from the audience so that we can do this in real time. Dan asked, in the context of digital transformation, how do you use BI software to develop KPIs and dashboards to align with business metrics? So I'll go to you first on that one, Brian.
And I'm just going to tweak the way I look at that question too from Dan, is that you start with developing the KPIs outside of the BI software. The KPIs are really a business decision about what are the things that matter that you need to measure as what's critical to your business. How are you going to measure your success? How are you going to measure how your processes are doing? So you need to make sure you have a mix of leading and lagging indicators as well, not just the things, your revenue numbers, your efficiency numbers, any cost numbers, anything like that, but you also need to have in there things that are assessing how your people are doing, the health of your processes, and making sure you have a well-rounded mix, whether that's using a balanced scorecard or just generally making sure you have a set of metrics that are across the board, kind of measuring what you need to know, and then driving from that to developing the dashboards and the reporting that you're going to need that align to those business needs. So in a digital transformation, if we're talking an ERP implementation, you're often going to have robust reporting capabilities tied to what's inside the ERP that are going to aggregate a lot of that information and give you a lot of data there, but there also may be data you're going to need to be pulling in, and very likely data you'll need from other sources as well. So whether that's pulling a BI tool or, depending on the complexity of the data, being able to aggregate outside of the system as a way to be able to get comprehensive and holistic measures of what you're doing.
Excellent. Great answer.
That was a great answer. I want to know if I can add anything onto that other than continuous improvement. So that's a great answer. I can't add anything to that other than as your targets are hit, your goals are met, continuous improvement is very, very important, right? So where you establish a KPI, you reach your KPI, you manage it, you sustain it, you need to get another one, right? Mm-hmm. So point being, this work is live work. It's not a one and done. It's a continuous cycle of improvement. But high five to you, man. That was awesome.
Yeah, mic drop there,
Sure did. Bam.
Absolutely.
And Sam's got a follow-up question there too that I think feeds right into that. And I see we have a couple other comments too we can address. But inappropriate KPIs can lead to people doing the wrong things. If you measure that, and it can be very easy to say, let's measure this thing that's the easiest thing for us to track, even if it's not the most important thing. And then you're driving your behavior, especially if you line up incentives towards that. So Sam, it's a great question because choosing the wrong KPIs is going to incent the wrong behavior.
Yeah. So to add on to that, the decision to monitor and measure a KPI is very important. A lot of time clients ask, what should we monitor? What should we look at? And I always refer them back to, what is your process telling you? What is the voice of your, customer, your business performance, your processes? When you do that work and you understand comparatively how all of these different voices are sounding or what they're telling you, that's how you can really drill down to the proper KPI. One thing that I also like to mention is making that KPI rolls up into the overall strategy of the business, especially the ones that are like on fire and we need to do it now. Those need to be interconnected with each other to make sure that we are meeting the needs of the area, yes, but also speaking to the goals and the strategy of the company, right? You have to make sure that the work you're doing is value added. It has to be tied back to that overall strategy, like I said, and then it comes down to at the department level for that KPI, how are we performing?
Absolutely. And when we're talking about BPM efforts, who should we be involving within that conversation from a high level? And Theresa, let's start with you. Since we started last time, I don't want him to keep one-upping you.
My turn, Brian. So again, I think that when you look at the work that you're going to do for the business process management or whatever term you want to use, it's important to understand from a higher level what that strategy and that goal looks like, and as well as listening to your processes, your business, etc. You have to align it, as I just mentioned, because if you're not, you're going to be working towards something, at that level they might not see or understand as a value added activity. So this activity is it's an investment. It is something that they're willing to, put some capital on. So we have to make sure that we show them that return by speaking directly to that overall strategy.
Absolutely. Anything to add, Brian?
Yeah, and I would just say, as far as the people who are involved, it's really important to get a look at it from a broad perspective and a deep perspective. The comments earlier, it's important to know what's actually happening on the ground. You don't just want to have the managers in sessions talking about how they designed the process 10 years ago. That may be how it works, but you need to make sure you're getting input from people who are actually working on processes. And what's important too is making sure that you are getting cross-functional discussion going. That's usually a big part of where you're going to see problems in the processes is handoff. So we often start with a client and get kind of a bird's eye view of their processes, and people, when they want to set up workshops with us, when we start an engagement, it often is, let's start with this department and we'll talk to this department and this department, but then you're missing the whole part of where they work together and where you may see challenges, because something that's optimized for the first group, and then for who they hand it off to downstream, they optimize what they're doing, but in between
Yeah.
there's a lot of gaps. So it's really critical to make sure you're getting people talking to each other.
Absolutely. I want to just add to that. When you're selecting that KPI and you get the direction, you have the data to prove it. You just have to say, have the data to prove it, right? Then to Brian's point, making sure that the people that you select to understand what those opportunities are. I personally use a cross-functional work stream diagram to understand the interconnectedness between all of the different stakeholders in the group. It's really important to make sure that everyone has a free conversation. We all need to understand what's going on. Tell me like it is, put everything on the table so we can figure it out. I can't tell you how important that is. Usually when, Brian and I have had this discussion 10,000 times, you go to a client, you say, hey, for your calibration process, who are your major stakeholders, right? Okay, well, you tell me 3 people. And then after Brian and I kind of have the conversation, ask those probing questions, it goes from 3 to 5 to 8 different stakeholders. That's when the fun starts, and you do the work and people think my process is this big. And now it's like, I can't even have enough room on the screen to show you where my hands are, but that's how big their processes are. And then when you show them, hey, this is what your process looks like, they see the pain points, they see the issues, they see how convoluted it is, and it just blows their mind. That's kind of fun for me. I don't know if it's in a weird way, but it goes to show you, like, you have to have the work. You got to do the work. You got to ask the questions. You have to be willing to tell me why this, process has 20 different workarounds that they know, but they don't want to know about. And then let's fix it.
Well, Theresa, I don't consider that weird fun. I mean, you and I, right after we get off this call, are jumping on with a client to have exactly that type of conversation to blow out a process.
It's going to be awesome.
That's excellent. Yeah, so important to have that cross-functional understanding, it sounds like. So let's go to another audience question here. We're getting some great questions, so I'm going to start at the beginning. Can you tell us which ERPs have strong BPM workflow engines as a part of the software to automate tasks, such as sending automatic emails, texts for approving purchase orders, etc.? Let's go to Brian first.
Yeah, so it's an interesting dynamic in this because workflow has become a basic expectation within ERP systems, but you also do see that some have pretty basic workflow set up, and you have others that build out in a more robust way, or that are going to give you some add-ons that can do that. But part of what I want to address in this too is, from my perspective, before I was in the ERP world, I actually spent more time in the BPM system world. So working with technologies that were built specifically to develop custom processes and build out really enhanced workflow capabilities along those lines. So I think the key thing there too is really understanding for any client, like what is the depth of workflow that you really need, and to the point of one other comment we had in the chat earlier, like how different are some of those processes that you're doing. Most companies do think what they're doing is pretty different, and then it takes digging into it to understand what parts of what they do are different, because usually there's something, but it's understanding what parts can really fit into very common workflows that are used, or do you have some really unique needs within your business that are going to drive you towards needing something really custom for you. So I don't want to really get into too much of differentiating which systems, as much as making sure you kind of have an understanding of how to identify what your needs are and tailor your decisions to that.
Great. Anything to add, Theresa? Okay.
No, that was good. That's
perfect.
I'm gonna have to not be on so many of these as a partner with you, man. This is like, no, I'm only joking. You're awesome. You're great. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Brian. Thanks. If he wasn't so busy doing all of the client work, he's so highly requested, we'd always have him on our marketing materials, because he is incredibly articulate, especially in these complicated type of processes. So another audience question here: what is the difference between measures, metrics, and KPIs? I would say that probably is the same thing as KPIs, but I wanted to ask the experts, and maybe we can spin that into, establishing those KPIs on what level of the organization.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yes, I do agree that they are very similar. And like I mentioned earlier, in my opinion, even when you look at BPI, that is one version of a methodology tool, a toolbox or framework. So it depends. Honestly, in my opinion, I use KPIs all the time. The metrics KPI, those are interchangeable for me. And then when you talk about how do you measure them or where do you measure them, when I used to work for the big three, the automotive big three, we always had to measure a KPI from that Hoshin Connery look, right? It's very high level and it kind of goes down. So yes, I'm tracking this specific metric, but it's going to be broken out differently on every department or every team to see how my piece of the operation contributes to that performance for that metric, which rolls up to that overall KPI.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Excellent. And then I'm just going to keep pumping these audience questions. We're kind of
Sure.
jumping all over the place, but I feel like, addressing these questions and really get into what the core of what our audience wants to hear. So I like this question because I think it's super important to address. How soon in the implementation process do you map the business processes?
Yeah, and thanks for that question, Jean.
Great question.
It is.
Yeah,
That's a great question. So, in my opinion, it's just like change management. You need to do it as soon as you hear about it. So, to me, I usually am brought in like midway, or when things are not adding up. It's best. It's better use of time if you bring us in early so we can understand, your current state. What are your issues? What are your requirements? What are your pain points? So when we understand what that landscape looks like, it helps the vendor, whoever we're working with, understand that client. So I just had this conversation yesterday. You can't put, a square peg out of the box into a round hole and expect it to work. It's not going to work. So when you have that crosswalk of, okay, here's my current state process now. These are all the issues, pain points, etc. Here's the vendor software. This is what we're offering. That transition state is where a lot of the translation gets lost. And then the customer is frustrated. So, I told you this is an issue for me, but I see the demonstration or I see the workshop. I'm not seeing how these things are connected. But when the vendor has that information, they can directly relay it back to the client during those sessions. So that light bulb goes off like, oh, okay, that was my pain point on that workflow in this area. You just demonstrated to me how it's going to be solved. And that way you have a level of comfort from the client of understanding buy-in, right? Adaptability and usage that you would not have had you not done that work earlier. But, if you bring us in and it's midway, it's still a worthwhile venture because now we're going to have a solution to your pain.
Great
In a
answer,
nutshell.
Theresa. Yeah.
I got one too. What?
Yeah, I totally. It's at whatever point you're talking about it, you should be mapping your processes. The implementation, in many ways, and Jean, I know you know this from having worked with you on this of getting some work done in your processes early on. But I think what's important to think about too is the depth of how much you go into different processes can vary based on where you're at and on the need to keep it moving. So you may not need to go into every process at immense levels of detail up front. In fact, we don't want to go into too much detail on as you're in the early stages of figuring things out. So you're going to get progressively deeper as you get into the process and keep iterating that and building a deeper understanding of what you're trying to get to.
Excellent. Great answers. The audience agrees as well. 5 stars, 5 out of 5. So I think
that's awesome.
I'd love for you guys to share a specific example from your experience on how operational excellence can be supported by technology. So we'd love to hear kind of a case study piece of that. So let's start with you, Brian.
Sure. So, and it's interesting too. The example I'll start with is one that has kind of moved from varying degrees of maturity of technology as well too. So when I was working in a retirement services organization, we had a very complicated process for onboarding new retirement plans. It would take months to go through it. Sometimes it could be a year if it was really complicated. And it's kind of a playbook and a standard set of tasks around that, but it's very adaptable based on what the needs are of what the organization has and what they're trying to do. And this was managed through spreadsheets and Word docs when I started getting involved in that. And we actually had tried to implement a BPM system that wasn't as tailored to the needs of what they required, and ended up not using it for some portions of it, but they ended up going with a Microsoft InfoPath solution, which helped bridge some of the gaps. And it was more of a business-driven technology than an enterprise-level technology, but it helped meet some of the needs and really define out some of what the organization needed. And you were seeing it on some of the KPIs around implementation of an onboarding of the retirement plans. And that moved then towards adopting a stronger BPM solution, more of an enterprise technology that was used to replace those InfoPath workflows and database behind it that were being used as a way of really managing it more robustly, having it as part of kind of your IT organization, having business continuity, backups, that type of thing too, as you implement an enterprise technology, as well as some more robust integration capabilities with other things in the organization. So there was an example where implementing the most complex technology that could meet all the needs wasn't necessarily the answer right away, because there were so many variables in the process that even trying to map them out, we hadn't figured out. And some of it we're really building that out through the intermediate step of InfoPath.
Absolutely. What about you, Theresa? What's your experience kind of within that area?
Well, again, so we'll repeat that primary question once again. I got all wrapped up in what Brian was saying. Trying to relate back to my years of experience.
Yeah, I think what I was asking is just for a specific case study or some experience you've had on how technology can enable that operational excellence that's supported by those BPM efforts.
So, yeah, a lot of times when I'm rolling out like the specific activity, and this is after the vendor or after the client has selected a vendor, right? Understanding, again, how that technology is work and speaking to the actual performance of the work, it's important for me. So, for example, one of the hospitals that I used to work for, they selected the Epic system, right? So you have this major system that they're trying to implement to understand how it's going to work in every one of the different departments across the hospital. Well, again, it wasn't helpful just by rolling out that, out of the box technology. It kind of created a stall in the timeline. So what we had to do is we had to go back and look at those processes by department. Actually, it was by hospital, by department, to understand how this information is going to work. And what we discovered was that crosswalk between what we were doing now and what the system offered, it wasn't there. It wasn't there at all. So we had to go back to the Epic system to say, hey, we need to do more customization. We need to do more training. We need to do more, work on how these things are going to connect with the teams, because it's not happening. Mm-hmm. So that was a lot of work that we had to do, but it was very well worth it. And by using the BPM and the operational excellence, we can identify those opportunities and go back to the vendor to say, hey, this is what we need. And it ended up working out. So we did it at one hospital that got merged with 2 other systems. So we took that process and merged it across, I think it was like 16 hospitals.
Wow, definitely.
It was a lot of work.
Yeah.
But again, I think it speaks back to really understanding from that OpEx perspective what's going on. I have my technology. Yes, I do. But how is it going to fit within my business ecosystem? How am I going to be able to optimally and efficiently roll all of this out to 16 different hospitals, and how many departments and how many shifts of how many people that are using the system? So
yeah, absolutely, and especially something so critical as healthcare. That's something that that certainly needs a lot of attention and just a lot of obviously process management.
So I'll give you a very simple example of that work. When you first roll out that system, for example, in the ER, they had the physician filling out all this information on the screen. Well, we did not see a high level of adoption or usage. There was a lot of a lot of calls coming in, a lot of tickets being submitted, and we didn't understand why. So when we took the time from our process, like I was the operational excellence consultant on that, to go and actually look to see what was happening, the physician had his back turned to the patient to fill all this information out. That's not what doctors do. That's not what they do. They're supposed to help the patient in the bed and speak to them directly. So by understanding from an operational excellence position in a process investigation, I looked to see what was going on. I interviewed people that I understood, okay, we cannot have the physician with their back turned. He has to be, or she has to be directly speaking to the patient and comforting the patient and understanding what's going on. So as a result of that, we had to get either one of those, and this is, I'm not going to date myself, but this is back in the day, we had to get like little tablets or even a scribe to do the work for the doctor, or get that information into the system for the data gathering piece. So again, when you look at what's going on and how it's performing, you have to dig in. And we would never have known that had I not done that. It would have just been, okay, the physicians aren't using this and it doesn't work. Well, that's not true. Let's figure it out.
Yeah, the experience and really unpacking that. And I think this is a good question from our audience to kind of go along with that. When implementing BPM, how much time do you typically spend on the as-is process versus assuming that workflows are inadequate in the old system and moving right to the to-be? So kind of current state versus future state. What's the balance there?
So are you saying current state maps that I've had in my system for a while versus current state as it's performing right now? So that, because that's like two different things. Like I'll have my maps in my drawer versus what people are really doing.
Yeah, and Dan, you can definitely elaborate, but I think what we're saying is how much time should you spend analyzing a process that you know is broken, as opposed to repivoting and focus on the strategy or the future state that you want it to be? What's the balance there? And Brian, maybe we'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, it's going to vary a lot based on an individual organization and what their needs are. I would hesitate to ever completely short circuit the as-is process, because you need to, as Theresa's talked about, really diagnose why things are broken. And there may be assumptions that you're making in there about what you do, what your customers need, what the needs of the process are, that could be wrong if you don't have enough of an understanding. But there's limits to how deep you necessarily need to go on current state, particularly in certain areas if they are pretty vanilla for you as an organization. You know, if your financial processes are not anything really unique to you as a business, you need to have a baseline understanding of what they are in current state, but you don't need to build out a massive amount of detail on those, and you'll want to move towards kind of where you're trying to get to. But the key thing to understand here, and sorry, Theresa, stealing your thunder on this one, but it's going to be helping to adapt to the change, because knowing what you're doing in the current state, even if you know where you want to get to, if you don't know what it's going to take to move your people to those future state processes, you're going to have a challenge there.
Yeah. So in my opinion, I think if you spend more time understanding the pain points, the issues, and the requirements of that as is current state, is a better use of time than digging down to a detailed level that it really won't matter, right? We understand this process is broken. That's why you call us. That's why you call third stage, to help and understand where those opportunities are. The process is the process. This is how it's operating. but why is it not operating to the way it was designed? To me, that's more value added work to give to the client, as well as to collaborate with the vendor to show them how this new system or this new model is going to alleviate their issues.
Excellent. And I think that that is so important, and it really kind of ties nicely to Andy's question over here, is whose responsibility is it to bring up the need for OCM, organizational change management, and when, question mark. So let's start with you, Brian, just to like mix it up a little bit.
Mix it up. Let's see what you have to say, Brian. I'm only joking.
I think it's anyone's responsibility who can bring it up. The question is going to be who can really make it happen and bring about the practices of OCM that are needed on a project. So, but I think that's really, really important. You may be in an organization where people don't really think of OCM as a critical need. And if you're someone who does understand that need, it's good to use whatever levers of influence you have to try to draw that out and to make an awareness within the organization of the need for that. But you really need to be starting with OCM from the beginning, much as you're starting looking at your processes at the beginning before you figure out your software, before you figure out directionally exactly where you're going to go. You need to be thinking about the activities of how you're going to support the change, how you're going to bring in the right people who are going to need to be a part of that, and do that early and work to introduce it. And for some organizations, they may not adopt a full OCM program, and if that's not what they're comfortable with and they can't get their leaders buy-in, you still want to take on whatever activities you can as part of that.
Excellent. Teresa, to add to that?
Yes. How much time do we have?
Yeah, I was just about to say we're gonna have to put a time. No, I'm just joking.
I know. So honestly, that was a great answer as well. Anyone should be able to bring that up, but do they is the question. A lot of times when I'm on projects that have to deal with OCM, I always ask the question, why hasn't the change worked for you before? Tell me why. And usually when I ask that question, everyone starts giving me reasons why it doesn't or why it hasn't stuck. And then they understand the need for what we do. So if you've tried this 5 times and it never gained traction, why is that? What happened? Who is involved? A lot of crickets go on, but it starts to help them generate some thought about, okay, maybe the approach we took from the last 5 times, it needs to be addressed, right? And then once those conversations start, it really becomes a piece of the conversation for the leadership to say, yep, okay, we didn't do this before. Usually it starts from the ground up, in my opinion, or mid-level managers, and then it kind of bubbles up to senior leadership. Because if you've tried an initiative 5 times, what's going to be the differentiator for the 6th? Because we can't keep continually doing this. You lose buy-in, you lose support, you create more fear in the organization, et cetera, et cetera. So in my opinion, anybody should bring it up, as Brian said. But then the next step is, let's talk about why it hasn't worked before.
Absolutely. I think understanding that activation point, who is the decision maker, the creator of change, and do they understand, the importance of it? And a lot of times that can be kind of a coach up scenario,
Absolutely.
And helping see the value. And then that kind of brings me to my next question over here is, when we're talking about BPM or operational excellence, should that be from the top down or from the bottom up as far as effort? Maybe we'll go to you first, Brian, on that one. Oh, well, no, never mind.
No, I'm only joking. No, go ahead. No, I mean, I can talk about this all day. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, well, like with every answer, I'll always hedge on the fact it really depends on the organization and kind of what the needs are and how they operate culturally. But it's important. Let's say this: if you're doing something from the top down and driving that effort, it's got to really engage the people from the bottom up in a way that is not just paying lip service to the role in that, but recognize that they're the people that are making things happen, and that they're the ones who understand the reality of what's being experienced on a day-to-day basis. And often, if asked the right questions, it's people on the bottom who can give you I shouldn't use the bottom in that way. The people who are actually
Front
performing the
line.
day to day, who
Sure.
can, yeah, who can come to the right answers, and sometimes just need to facilitate the right questions and bring the right people along. From the flip side, though, from the bottom up, sometimes there may not be an organizational push towards this type of improvement, and it doesn't mean it can't start from the bottom up to really implement some small wins, do something at even as much as I talked about being cross-functional before. If you can start something at a department level and show some wins that way, and show a discipline that you want to roll out within the organization, that can build some momentum to start to grow things at a broader level.
Yep. So just to add on that, if you do start from that perspective, senior leadership, CEO, whomever, they like wins, right? They like to see proof is in the pudding. But if you're asking, how can this be supported across an organization, it's definitely going to have to start from the top, because they're the one that's controlling capital and the activity of a business, right? And again, how does it align to my strategic plan? How does this work across the organization, so I can turn around and show an ROI on the efforts that we've actually been able to achieve and the results we've been able to achieve? So, you know, when you have work like this, again, and if you're able to reach a result, a positive trend, or meeting a goal, that will get a lot of attention for you, right? So you have to show the benefit, the value add, and the payback. Once you do, the support has to come from the top to get that capital released, and the support from all of the different levels of the organization.
And to build on that, where is the user adoption strategy built within a digital transformation? And how do you ensure that that's something that is an investment within the overall process? Because obviously we can all have systems, but if nobody uses them or doesn't understand how to use them, then they're probably not that effective, I would assume.
100%.
So who wants to elaborate on that? I need a buzzer for you guys.
I know. I can take it, or, you know, I can add on to Brian. I think we definitely have, you know, the same thought here. So the question is, why do we have a low user adoption rate? The question is why? What did we not do to help support the team? And that goes back to understanding their pains from the very beginning of that current state. What are your issues? What are your requirements? What do you need? What is your pain? And right then and there, you do two things. You capture your performance or your current state, but you also create that buy-in, that willingness to own and partner with you to help make these changes impactful. When you start building that buy-in, the trust, the cooperation, the ownership, right? The accountability, I'm giving that to you. So now you find it as a worthwhile activity to actually use the system. But if I come to you and say, hey, we did all this work, letting you know, next week we're going to turn the switch on and you're going to use this, you're like, what are you talking about? Why am I going to use this? What does this benefit me? How does my issue with this get fixed? I don't know what's going on. So in my opinion, you have to go right to the beginning, and you have to start the work of not just understanding your systems and your business ecosystem, your processes, performance, but you have to create the buy-in, the trust, the accountability, and ownership from the people who are going to use it. And then you use KPIs to measure.
And yeah, very thorough answer, Theresa. I know you do a great job of bringing this in with our clients, of tying all of these pieces together. And the only thing I want to add to this is just how it ties into a common misconception of what we deal with up front a lot from our clients, which is thinking that they hear, well, people don't like the current systems, they're going to be excited for this no matter what happens. And just
good point.
we're not going to have any resistance because people are so ready to get rid of this piece of junk that we're using right now. And I mean, it's a good thing that people are ready for that, but all those things Theresa was talking about, those are things you need to do to connect it to people, even people who are ready to get rid of the system that they're on now. That doesn't automatically mean they're going to be happy for whatever it is you're changing to, without being really complete about how you're looking at that change.
Man, that's another can of another topic for another day. I'm gonna tell you, like, when you have business processes that are broken, but you're somehow able to keep your head above water, that's because people have put a lot of time, energy, and resources into creating workarounds, right? So if I don't ask you these questions, if I don't establish a connection and relationship with you, if I can't gain your trust in what I'm doing, I'm not going to be able to break that person who spent the last 10 years refining these workarounds, because guess what? I tried the system you gave to us. It didn't work. Maybe I got bit a couple times because I tried and I couldn't do it. So now I have this refined model that I'm using to get everything I need. So why am I giving that up? Those are the kind of pitfalls that people experience when you don't start soon enough, or the activities aren't involving the people who are actually using the system.
Absolutely. I think that's so important in just really evaluating that human aspect. I'm curious if you could give us your feedback. It seems as though from a business process management standpoint, it can be difficult to have the awareness to be able to evaluate your own business's systems. Is that something that you would recommend reaching out to a third party or a specialist in that sort of scenario, just so that you can kind of garner all the insights and optimization opportunities?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. I was like, yeah, let's talk about it.
Yes.
Sorry, I should have waited till you were finished, but I'm speaking
No.
out.
I'm glad that
You're thinking about the buzzer that.
Yes.
I'm gonna buzz you. Yeah,
That's all. We should get a buzzer and do like Family Feud style answers.
Yeah.
That would be fun. Oh my gosh.
Well, I
Sorry.
made a third stage Jeopardy, so next time, folks, we're going for it.
Go ahead, Brian.
Well,
I'll let you.
Yeah, well, let's start with you, Brian. Just obviously, this is kind of your wheelhouse. This is what you do for businesses, your specialty, and I just I'm wondering from that perspective, do you ever kind of get that laser focus on like this part of the business is broken, but it's actually not that part of the business is broken. It's the piece that comes before it, and how do you address that?
Yeah, and I mean, I'll give maybe the surprising part of the answer up front, which is it doesn't necessarily need to be someone independent, but it does need to be someone who has the understanding and the discipline to be able to look really across your business as a whole. So, worked with organizations who do have robust process management capabilities and teams and people. That was the role I came from before I came to Third Stage, for example. People who have a team and a discipline and a process towards doing this throughout the organization. And if you have that established and it's been effective and it's proven results, and you can do that in the organization, that may be a part of the journey you can do yourself. But if you don't have that as a strong organizational discipline, you're going to need some help to build that out. And building that out might mean helping to develop a function like that within your team. But it's something that it often can work best by having a team of people who are skilled and have experience at doing this to help you through that journey, and to hopefully not do this just as a one-time thing either, but to really build out an organizational practice towards looking at and maintaining your processes, and not just looking at them at the time that you're rolling out a new technology.
Anything to add to that, Theresa?
You know the answer is yes. I do. So for me, I think having another set of eyes is helpful to look at a process. Many times when I walk into an organization and I start partnering with people, you have the individuals that say, yeah, we tried this before, it didn't work. Or you have the ones that have put a lot of time and an effort into a process or into something, then they hold the cards very close to their chest. So when I say, hey, you know what, I understand you, I hear you, you're the expert at what you do, I'm the expert at what I do, let's partner and figure it out. Because I'll ask questions that maybe they already, they know about, but they're not thinking about because they see it every day. They experience it every day. And maybe they're used to that pain and it's not really an issue until someone for instance, like myself from third stage comes in and asks that question and asks some some additional probing, and like, oh my gosh, you're right. Maybe it is the process before me. Maybe I have just become, settled on the fact that I had to work around. It's really not a problem anymore, but you know what? It is a problem. So let's go investigate that. Sometimes when you're so close to a process or you have a lot of time invested into something, it's kind of hard to see, the forest through the trees, is if that's, I forgot if that's the right way to say it. But again, if you have that extra set of eyes that, agnostic set, like, hey, I'm just asking questions, things come out of that conversation that can really help an organization identify what those other burning opportunities would be. You don't want to waste time. I'm a big opponent of wasting time. I don't want to do it. So let's figure it out.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like that house metaphor that if you follow a lot of our podcasts or conversations I have with Eric, could I put a roof on a house? I mean, probably, but is that my everyday job?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
So just investing in that efficiency and that expertise, I think a lot of times people have this ownership and it almost comes with a level of shame. Like, this is my business, right?
Yeah.
So I should know everything that happens here, and just opening up that conversation, that vulnerability to say, maybe I should have somebody else come in here and take a look at my roof, even though it's my house.
Yeah.